Today from Councillor Dempster, and we have the leader here substituting on his behalf.
I believe Councillor Smith is in the building, he just hasn't arrived yet. I'd just like to remind everybody present that the meeting will be recorded and the recording will subsequently be made available to the public for listening. Any declarations of interest? But no, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 3. It's a presentation for the Common Housing Register, Homes for Dumfries and Galloway by Evie Copeland from DGHP.
Okay, hi. Basically, we're just going to go a quick run over of what Homes for D&G is and what it means for applicants as well. So, for RSLs and local authorities, it's normal practice to name the Common Housing Register, and we've called ours Homes for D&G. So, what is it? It's Dumfries and Galloway's new Common Housing Register. We've got 4 partners. It's DGHP, Home in Scotland, Irvine and Loreburn. And the 4 partners have come together to basically improve access to applications and the whole process for people applying for social housing. So, it's a great time to be an applicant, and it really is. We're not just saying that. CHR doesn't only standardise the process for RSLs, but it means that there's one form that's added onto the super database, and suddenly you go from having to fill in 4 applications to just 1, and suddenly you'll be considered by all 4 RSLs in the area. It's simpler, it's quicker, and it's easier than ever before to apply for social housing. So, what makes it a wee bit different in comparison to what we have to do now? It's a streamlined version of the service, but better. Not only is the whole process better for those in need of housing, it's better for the RSLs as well. We can more efficiently manage the stock that we've got right across all 4 partners. And as I say, it's one policy for one housing list for one database. And it's all about the applicant. That's the most important thing of all. It's flexible, it's convenient, you can manage your application whenever it suits you. If you want to have no contact with another human being, you can do that. If you want to apply online in the middle of the night because you can't sleep or thinking about you need a house, you can do that. You can work with us whatever way you want. And we've got this wonderful website that I'm really here to talk to you today about, that's the kind of heart of it all, that you can find all your information and manage your own application. So, you can visit the website now. You'll see in your wee packs, we've given you wee cards that'll go out to all the applicants that have got all their sort of contact details on it and the website. So, if you've got some downtime, go and have a wee look. Explore it for yourself, see what's happening. We've got a few features that are unique to Dumfries and Galloway's Common Housing Register. We really are at the forefront of this. It's good stuff. So we'll just have a quick look at the website. Right, so when you access it, this is your home page. We've set up a few pages just to have a quick look over today. But all the information you would ever need is accessed here. So we've got a little bit of information about us, what the Common Housing Register is, and who's involved, briefly. Then there's a bit of information about the partners, which there's info about the council, obviously, DGHP, Home, Irvine and Loreburn. That's all there. There's links to each of the individual agencies' websites as well. Allocating properties, there's just a brief bit of blurb about how we do that and how we point as well. Then the big thing for this, for us, is the RSLs in Dumfries and Galloway use a facility called Home Swapper, which if you're a tenant of an RSL and you're not moving on the waiting list, a mutual exchange is a really, really easy way that you can kind of take control of your situation, have a wee look for yourself, see what's there, see what you can get yourself. But the thing for that is the RSL needs to pay for that service, whereas now we're doing it for free. Anybody can do it, anybody can sign up, providing that you are a tenant of our partners. So, you can sign yourself up. You can add this lovely one here that we've got an example of. I'm not quite sure where that is, but it's pretty nice. I don't know why you would ever want to move from there. So it's only 2 bedrooms. That must be the problem. There must be too much space for leisure. So what they would do, when they fill that in, they have the choice of the sort of property type, the bedrooms, the location, the town and area, which they would just type in, and their rent as well. Then there's a wee bit of space for them to add in information about themselves, what they're looking for, how much they're willing to pay, and where they're looking for it. For that as well, how they contact is through a message they'll message each other, and it's totally in the hands of the tenants how they want to do it. But obviously, with that comes the conditions that they need to get in contact with their landlords. They can edit that as well, which is a facility that's really, really easy for them to use. They put in a code that's emailed to them, and when they add that in, they can just make any changes they need to. To place an advert, they need to give us a title, their contact name and email address, just so that the information can transfer through from one person to another. The details about their house, their rent, their property type, bedrooms. They need to tell us a wee bit more about their house as well, because that's the thing that's really going to sell it. They can add their images. Then they need to tell us a little bit more about their swap, as I've already said. And then they agree to some terms and conditions that just sort of set out, if you send us a photo that there's piles and piles of rubbish in your house, we're not going to post it. You need to do something about that. And we will be in touch. And finally, we've got a contact page as well, which lets them just see how they can contact us in the various different ways. And this contact form here is on every single page as well. The final thing on the website that they can do is use this self-service portal, which allows them to check their list positions. That's changing all the time and is live. So we'll just nip back to this. So obviously not everybody will have access to the internet, so there's a newsletter, 4 pages, going out to every single applicant. It's got all the information in a condensed form that basically is on the website, but it'll go out to every single person regardless of their access. That'll go out to 6,500 people, and they'll also receive some of the high quality market merchandise, which we've included in your packs as well. There's a wee fridge magnet that everybody will get that's got the logo, the number, the website on it, and they'll also get these wee cards that we've already talked about. So this is the newsletter. It's pretty neat as well. It's all good. It all looks really good. The content of it is really, really good as well. And we've got this contact number as well. So it's a nice, simple number that everybody will remember, easy to put in. It's conveniently placed on the keys of your phone as well. And that'll take you straight through to the service centre, which is open 8 AM till 7 PM, Monday to Friday as well, where you'll speak to someone who can help you with your application, whether it's at source or whether it's with the implementation team. The implementation team's been recruited right across the 4 partners as well, so they know lots about it. Our ongoing communication, the Common Housing Register, although it is about the application process, it's about how we get that out there and how we keep people informed about it as well. So that'll be stage 2 of the website, the actual launch of it all, the stakeholder engagement events, the support provider engagement events as well, engaging with applicants most importantly, the ongoing press, and really to make sure that Homes for D&G is delivering for the applicant. And that's us. That's us.
Thanks very much, Evie. Has any members got any questions on the website? Councillor Smith?
Thanks very much, Chair. I don't need a house at the moment, but you've sold it so well that I'm going to apply online tonight when I get home. But I suppose the big issues that people will probably have that are on the waiting list is obviously to check their position on the waiting list. How is that updated in real time? Is it? Yeah.
When they once they sign up to the self-service portal, what that does is basically it's live. It is live. So, if 10 applications have been added and 2 people are higher up the list than you, you'll know as soon as you check.
Effectively, it's real time. It's been
real
updated
time,
all the time.
And it all just relies on you checking real time as well.
Councillor Peacock?
Okay, Chair. Just with regard to the applications there, how will you identify if the tenant or prospective tenant can go on there and put in the information that suits them and such like that for the application? How will you be able to track that as it's listed on the website and their position in the waiting list, etc. is listed? They could go back into the information and change that to possibly move them further up the waiting list. How can you check that is proper information they're putting in, etc.?
When they have the contact with us, it's never instantaneous. They can manage their application in the sense that they can take control and ask for the changes to be made. It still needs to go through a member of staff, just for the reason that you're saying. It needs to be checked that it's true and factual information as well.
Councillor Lever?
Just in terms of the exchange, can you exchange out with the region? Because obviously Irvine have got houses in the Ayrshire region. Could you exchange outside?
The exchange that we've got on the Homes for D&G website is specifically for any tenant of our 4 partners, pretty much so that we've got the information about the property to check that it is correct. If somebody from out with the region wants to apply for social housing, they feel free to apply online, but if they're going, if they're looking for a swap, that's what this national home swapper thing is really in place for. But it's about, like, Lowerburn wasn't signed up to home swapper, so it's a cost for a tenant to be able to swap. If I live in Dumfries and I want to move to Newton Stewart, for example, there's a cost to me if I'm a Lowerburn tenant at the moment, whereas now there's not. It's free for everybody in Dumfries and Galloway.
Councillor Geddes?
It would be fair to say, Chair, would it not, that it's a much more open and transparent system, but it will still have the necessary control mechanisms in it, which will avoid people being able to profit, as it were, from malfeasance, for want of a better term. That'd be a fair comment, would it? Yeah, aye. That big step forward as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks. If there's no other questions, thanks very much for the presentation. Move on to item 4. It's Common Housing Register Progress Report. Mr Lynch, I believe you're speaking to this again, to add?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Nothing particular to add, just following on from Evie's informative and lively presentation. We've got the report before you with the Common Allocations Policy attached. We're looking for the subcommittee to sign off to agree the Common Allocations Policy and note the progress with the potential go-live date. We've also got other representatives from the CHR partnership here today, who I'm sure will be happy to answer any questions with the Chair's consent. That's Susan Quinn, who's the CHR coordinator, Jay Moore's director from DGHP, and Jim. Okay, thanks, Chair. Any questions, be happy to answer.
Councillor Geddes?
Thanks, Chair. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm not damning it with faint praise, let me make that abundantly clear to you. As far as I'm concerned, we waited a long time for this, and I'd like to think that the end product, thus far, has been well worth the wait. I think it's a first-rate piece of work, and I would commend unreservedly not only our own officials, John and Jim in particular, but everyone else who's been involved in it. If there hadn't been a spirit of compromise and a desire to see this thing made work, it wouldn't have happened. So don't let's delude ourselves. On the back of that, obviously, there's issues in the report about sort of reviewing the implementation of it, on a regular basis, and I think there's to be a fully fledged review, if I understand it correctly, Chair, within the next 6 months, and that's only right and proper. I would like to think, if at all possible, though, sir, within that period, bearing in mind that there's only comparatively few members of the Housing Subcommittee, that we would put arrangements in place to allow this piece of work to be disseminated as widely as possible to all members of the Council, and whether or not you do that, for instance, with a presentation by John, Jim, and whoever else, as it were, to the 4 area committees, or whether has been mooted, perhaps it might be the full Council, is no really, I'm not going to be precious about it, but I still think that whichever alternative is chosen, we should, in fact, do the piece of work and get, that further developed, as it were, to all of the members of the Council, if it's possible to do so, filling which, as many as it's possible to do so. My own personal preference would be in an area committee context. I appreciate that that's not necessarily the view of everyone in this chamber today, and I'm prepared to listen and be guided insofar as that's needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to welcome Councillor Geddes' suggestion for wider dissemination. There is obviously significant staff training going on as we move towards the implementation date. There's also wider stakeholder engagement sessions planned through May and June. And obviously, as part of that, we'd be more than happy to attend whichever forum members think most suitable, either a presentation to the full Council or presentations to area committees. We're really in your hands to decide how best to take that forward.
Councillor Peacock?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree. It is a well-written document. It's very clear and concise and laid out for particular ease of reading and understanding. So congratulations for that. A couple of quick points. First of all, will this document as a whole, will it be available in libraries and places like that for members of the public to come in and just have a read through and check through like that? Another point was, before the allocations policy actually goes live, all the applicants at the moment on the various waiting lists through the different associations, will they have gone through this new process and therefore allocated their position on the waiting list, etc.? Or will they have to wait until it goes live and then everybody reassessed?
Do you want to come in, Jane?
Yes, thank you. Once the Common Housing Register goes live, a letter will go out to each and every one of the applicants, giving them information about their position in the waiting list. And I think this is a step forward because with some organisations, the applicants haven't been told the positions on the lists up until now, so they will get the letters as soon as the register goes live.
So once we've accepted and the policy has been adopted, then everybody will be reassessed through this and then informed of their positions.
Yes, they'll get the position on the waiting list at the beginning of June. Yeah.
Councillor Crothers?
Thanks, Chairman. Just great presentation. Thanks to everybody for all the hard work. Obviously, there really has been a lot of hard work put in here. I think as far as Councillor Geddes' proposals, I prefer the area committee option and promote that to the maximum through the chairmanships and any communications we put out at that time to really involve the public if we can. I think there is 4 partners, but there's 5 partners. There's 4 main partners being the housing association, but there is 5 including the council. I think we should, as a council, if it goes to area committees, we should promote that strongly, and that would obviously demonstrate that. One thing it came is, because I didn't pick up on it, it's in there, it's through all the different threads, but often there'll be circumstances where you've got elderly people and they're in a housing accommodation, say a block of flats, where you've got surrounded by people with potential habitual problems, you could say. What's in this for future reference and what's in here? How do we look at that problem? Because this is across the whole of Dumfries and Galloway now, maybe even further afield actually, if you're talking urban and home where they could actually potentially go to different out with Dumfries and Galloway. How do we address that through this policy, that potential conflict? How do we stop that conflict as best we can?
Jane?
Yes, in terms of within the policy, we identify properties, both amenity housing and sheltered accommodation, that is really earmarked for people that are over 55 years of age. So there is the ability within the policy to allocate specific housing for older people. And in terms of if there is conflict within blocks, etc., we have policies out with the allocation policy that would deal with that. Mm-hmm.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. Yep, 10 points for enthusiasm in the presentation. You could sell fish to the... Anyway, no, I agree entirely with Councillor Geddes and Councillor Carruthers' sentiments. I think it would receive far better scrutiny at an area committee. We are a disparate region, whether we care to admit it publicly or not. That what may be a motive up Dixhill and Stranraer may not be applicable in Kirkcudbright, etc. And if it went to the area committee, all members would get the chance to feed into it. It could then report back to full council the way in which DG First has done previously, that the recommendations from Wigton Shara, the recommendations from the Stewartry are, etc., etc. And we would get an all-encompassing blanket on the thing, but it would be better scrutinised at a local level first. And if Councillor Geddes cares to make that a motion and it goes to a vote, I will happily second it.
Councillor Geddes, you want to come in on that point?
I think it's absolutely imperative, though, that colleagues appreciate just exactly where I'm coming from. I'm not suggesting for one moment that we take this, we scrutinise it and we come back with recommendations for alteration. No way. My attitude is that, there's been a tremendous amount of work done in, put into this. It's a high-level document. I would like to think that, it would be presented to us at an area committee level. We would be asked to note, what's being proposed. Anyone has any issues that they wanted to raise, by all means, but it would not be on the basis, Chair, of unpicking or delaying the implementation, as it were, of what's already been agreed. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that that's what Councillor Foster was alluding to. I'm criticising myself more than anyone, perhaps for maybe a bit of lack of clarity when I put forward the original suggestion. I think, if there are issues, to be raised and perhaps alterations to be made, that should be done, Chair, in my view, at the conclusion of the 6-month review. I think that would be the due and the appropriate time to do so on the basis of evidence, an evidence-based process. But what I still feel would be important and beneficial to all members of the council, as I say, would be for a briefing, a presentation, call it what you will, to be made. And my own personal view, as I say, is that would be better done in the context of area committees. But as I say, and I will move that. I'd be interested to hear if any colleagues have different views. Thank you.
Councillor Foster?
I agree with an extent with Councillor Geddes, but nobody has got the monopoly on all good ideas. There may be something missing in there that we don't see that has been slipped that could come forward as a recommendation for addition. I'm led to believe that the likes of overcrowding, you get 20 points, something like that. One's nodding their head, one's shaking their head, so little wonder I'm not clear. But supposing there were 5 sharing a room as opposed to 2, would you get extra points? The minutiae, the fine things like that we could raise at area committee, bring up, and it could come forward as a possible addition or a point for consideration if we want to go down the road of Councillor Geddes. I'll quite happily accept that.
Councillor Carson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would support going back to local area committee, whether that's for noting or for further suggestions to come forward 6 months later. My question was on a kind of operational basis. You're going to announce people's positions on the list sometime mid-June. Given that the vast majority, if not everybody, will actually look like they've gone down the list and are not quite so near the top, will there be simple guidance notes on how that list is going to be brought together? Because there may be more available properties, but there's far more people going to be on the list. So I would imagine that you're always going to be lower than you are at the moment on separate lists. Is that not the case? And I think the first thing people will do will be get on the phone and say, why am I was number 4, but it looks like I'm now number 6. What has happened? Is there going to be simple guidance notes and enough staff available to address that when it happens beginning of June?
Yes, I can give members assurance that there will be plenty of staff on the phones ready to take the calls, and in terms of all correspondence that goes out to each and every applicant, there'll be clear instructions really focusing on telephoning and making inquiries, but we can, as necessary, ask people to go out and do home visits as well.
Councillor Crawlers?
Thanks, Chair, for letting me back in. I would concur with Councillor Geddes in this case. I think this, and as I said before, this should be taken to the 4 area committees to maximise the promotion of this actual policy. I think we agreed here today as the strategic committee. It's within the delegation set out in the front of the back of the front page. So happy to do that. And if there is any recommendation for area committee, then that can be referred back to us to look at again if we think there's any fine detail in there. And like as we pointed out, 4 area committees, 4 different types of cultures, even almost. So that we could pick up at that point.
Yeah. Councillor Smith?
I think Finlay's touched on the main point I was going to make, that the immediate issue will be, from our point of view, is that the phone will start to ring that I've suddenly changed position on the list, and we need to be in a position to explain exactly why somebody's, it's not just a case of it's a new policy, that's why you've changed, actually explaining in detail to people exactly why they've had a change, why in what way is the policy changed that may affect it, or have they just changed simply because there are more people on the list, because previously it might only been in Lorben. So I think that's a really important piece of work, because I'm assuming that from the policy, people are not going to jump from number 1 to number 947, but people will move position just by default. I think the other point is that I mean, for me, I've read the document and nothing jumps out that I think crazy, but what I haven't done is sat down with the 4 existing documents and gone through them line by line and compared all the changes. So in many ways, I'm not saying I'm taking a jump in the dark here, but in many ways, we're taking the report and the policy at face value without maybe fully understanding every single change, because it is obviously bringing 4 different policies together. So I think the monitoring and the review process in 6 months is going to be absolutely crucial. We need to see exactly how this works in practical terms and look at it closely after it's had a bedding in process. It might very well be part of that monitoring process is the area committee. That isn't a case of taking this to area committee next month, it's a case of taking it to area committee after members have maybe seen it in practice. and are able to relay their experiences from constituents into that process before it comes back to this committee in 6 months' time. But I think the monitoring of the process is going to be absolutely crucial, because there will be changes here, and there might be unforeseen issues that come up that we haven't been able to see in the document in front of us. I mean, the other point is just to relay the comments about very pleased this is here at long last. I'm going to miss Jeff asking every month at Housing Committee, where is the common housing policy? It's late again, but at least we've got it now. And as I said, there's nothing jumps out that I think isn't sensible.
Yeah, Mr. Lunch.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to reassure Councillor Smith and other members that the intention would be to bring back a review, to undertake a review after 6 months, and members would be fully engaged in that, and then there'll be an annual review thereafter. So we've got lots of checks and balances in place. I think all the partners acknowledge it's a new policy, it's a new process, it's a new way of working. We need to make sure that we get it right, but also we're flexible enough to change if things are looking that some things need to be tweaked or changed.
Okay, Councillor Lever is the first time, and then Councillor Geddes.
Yeah, just to confirm, I'm absolutely delighted we've now got the policy, so I won't be asking in the future. I'll have to think of something else. Just two questions. The under occupation, I see we got 5, 10, 15 points. Now, we've discussed this at the Housing Committee, subcommittee on a number of occasions, how we actually persuade people who are under occupying, elderly people, to move out of big houses into ones which are more suitable. Do you think we've got this right in terms of the number of points we're given? I mean, if you've got 3 bedrooms too many, you get 15 points, which isn't a great number of points. So I'm just wondering whether it would have that effect of freeing up accommodation. So I'd be interested to hear your comments on that. And the second one is just the contact. Is there a dedicated contact for elected members to contact within the CHR setup if they've got queries on behalf of their constituents?
Yes, if I can answer that in reverse order, that elected members do have the contact through the RSL at the moment, but we can ensure that there is a direct contact for any allocation inquiries through the CHR. That's not a problem at all. Secondly, in terms of the under occupation points, we've talked at length, as you mentioned previously, about this, and we're taken very much as what we discussed is a very person-centred approach to under occupation. And the points are there. We're going to strictly monitor the outcomes of all the lets in the first 6 months, and if any adjustment has to take place, then it'll be taken at that stage. But people that are needing to downsize to avoid the under occupation charge, and perhaps elderly people in larger houses, we're looking at each case individually, and we'll be able to take a more person-centred approach to ensure they've got all the support to move.
Councillor Geddes.
Let me go back, sir, and I make no apologies for harking back yet again, to what exactly I'm meaning. But I would hope that when we come to approving the recommendations, we will agree the common allocations policy as attached to the appendix, noting that it has been externally validated to ensure legal and statutory compliance, and that it incorporates best practice, and that in addition, we arrange for John and Jim, as it were, to take the agreed common allocations policy out to area committees to explain, to publicise, for want of a better term, promote what's being done, and to give these area committees the opportunity to raise any issues or any points which come to their mind, but not to be fed in, sir, as part of the first review process in 6 months' time, because I hear what Graham has said, for instance, on the issue of overcrowding. That certainly resonates with me, but the last thing I would want to see, Chair, would be that going to the likes of the Wigan Area Committee, and then a reference back from the Area Committee to this Housing Subcommittee, and thereafter to the boards of the various RSLs, and slowing the whole process down, as it were, before implementation. I would like to think that issues of that type would be flagged up, would be noted and flagged up, and at the end of the day would be fed into the process, the review in 6 months' time. Now, as I've already said, Chair, that review would be evidence-based at that time. And as I say, to me, to do it otherwise is merely going to slow up the process and if not going to grind it to a halt. And I would not want, under any circumstances, to see that happen. So I think there is a middle way, a reasonable way of doing that. Encourage the area committees to flag up any issues that they might have. They would be fed back into the first review in 6 months' time on the back of the evidence as to how the scheme is working at that stage, and you take matters from there. I think there's also another point, sir, which we haven't mentioned thus far, and I think it's absolutely imperative, Chair, that this committee instructs that a raft or a suite of key performance indicators, for want of a better term, are developed insofar as they can be and as expeditiously as possible, as it were, to inform the Council as Strategic Housing Authority as to the effectiveness of the implementation of this, the Common Allocation Policy. Because otherwise, if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to properly monitor and scrutinise the impact of this from our particular perspective.
Do you want to come in on that point, Mr. Lynch?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just picking up on the last point that Councillor Geddes made. One of the large number of positive improvements in terms of the allocation process with the CHR is that the ability to run quite detailed and bespoke reports around performance, around statistics, and around housing data and intelligence. And that will be of huge benefit to us as the Strategic Housing Service. And we're already in early discussion with colleagues who will be maintaining the system. It's the Orchard system to run bespoke reports as required. They will then feed into the monitoring reports that we'll bring back to members on a 6 monthly basis.
If I have no other members' questions, turn to the recommendations. Members are being asked to note the updated position of taking forward the Common Housing Register project as summarised in paragraphs 3.3 to 3.6 of the report. Number 2, we're being asked to agree the Common Allocations Policy as attached, noting that it has been externally validated to ensure legal and statutory compliance and that it incorporates best practice. Are members willing to put the additional in there that we take the Common Allocations Policy to area committees as a noting procedure? I agree totally with Councillor Geddes. We're the Strategic Committee. We're the ones that have to agree it. However, the views of anybody on the area committee can be brought back and can be looked at during the 6 month review. Yeah, Councillor Carruthers.
I mean, I think it'd be a great option to take it to area committee pre the launch or right on the launch, promote it that way. Then after that, it would probably be going back to area committee, but for a more of a performance type, or if there's issues to be raised. There is that thing about if we take it too early or too late. If we take it too early, we certainly can't. It'd be difficult to add anything that we can't add here already. Once it's in place, our constituents have got a chance, then they'll feed back to us. Then at that point, we can come back in. So it's just getting that timing right. I think it'd be a good option to take it to area committees to get out there into the wider public domain.
Yeah, I think initially what I would be looking at under point 2 would be actually to take it to the area committees to actually publicise what the actual new policy is going to be. If any member at an area committee identifies that there may be a little problem there, they're quite free to identify it. However, it would be the 6 month review. I would hope by the time the 6 month review comes up, we would actually have developed by that time the KPIs. We would then possibly have to make a decision at that point whether we actually would want to delegate that, or not delegate it, but to actually filter that down to the area committees as well. But I would think we would need to wait until we see what the KPIs are at the time. Are members willing to agree to that? Number 3 is note the launch event has been planned to mark the successful delivery of the CHR project as detailed in 3.7. And number 4, note the 6 month monitor report will be submitted to the Housing Subcommittee after implementation detailed at paragraph 3.3.4. Can I just, as chair of the committee, thank Mr Lynch, Mr O'Neill and all the staff, both in the council and in the 4 RSLs, for the hard work that it's taken to get to this point. I am aware that the council has been talking for a long time about this. However, as it said in the report, the actual agreement was only signed 18 months ago, and to get to where we are now, in 18 months, I think has been a really hard piece of work, and well done to everybody involved in it. I hope I'm saying that in 6 months as well. If we move on to item 5, it's the SHIP update. I believe, Mr Lynch, you're doing this one again. Is there anything else you'd want to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add to the report, but happy to take any questions. And also to advise members that George West from Property Services is here to answer any questions in relation to 3.5. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Carruthers.
Nothing to do with 3.5, Chair. Just the 946k that will be left for last year's. How much will we have allocation for this year if that's the case? I think that's what it says right at the very end of 3.9, that there'll be 946,000 left over. Is that right? Suppose clarification on that first, is that the case? And if that is the case, what will the roll-up be for the whole year? What will be the allocation for this year?
Thanks, Chair. We're assuming for 14-15 the revenues will be broadly the same as previous years. So if there was no further commitments made during the next financial year, there would be the 946 balance as identified at 3.9 if both proposals are agreed today, plus another full year's allocation for 14-15. So that would take us to uncommitted balances of about 1.8 million. But obviously it's a fluid account where it's money's coming in, money's going out. But it was to give members assurances of the size of the fund that's currently available.
Thanks, Chair. That was my understanding. Thanks very much.
Councillor Geddes.
Would it be possible, perhaps, Chair, with your leave, to go through paragraphs 3.2, 3.3, 3.4 and 3.5 and just knock down the proposals one at a time? That I personally would find helpful.
Yeah, I was going to get there eventually. I just was wanting to see if there was any just general questions. If members are content, we'll deal with the Thornhill Abbeyfield redevelopment by Lowerburn Housing Association at 3.2. Is there any questions on that particular part of the report? It would appear to be that they were content with that one. 3.3, the Eastfield Road, Dumfries, Lowerburn Housing. Is there any specific questions on that one? Councillor Smith?
It's not as much a question, it's more an observation. Obviously disappointed that the Eastfield Road project isn't going ahead, but very much welcome the alternative project in Queen Street. I think that ties in entirely with what a major strategic aim of this council is in terms of the regeneration of the town centre, so very much welcome that proposal and hope that it's more successful than what's happened in terms of Eastfield Road. It does raise the point, I suppose, that once you announce you're going to basically carry out a housing development, the person with the land suddenly has maybe pound signs flashing before their eyes, and as a result of that, sometimes I suppose the asking price becomes a little bit inflated because they suddenly see the fact that we're about to buy something. You know, it's happened in other council departments whereby we've agreed projects and all of a sudden the person that owns the land certainly starts to ask for interesting figures, and I suppose that's a danger of the fact that this is such a public process that we agree to fund something, and I'm sure it adds inflation to the cost straight away.
You wish to come back on that, Mr Lynch?
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Smith's right. With the process that we have to follow is set down by the Scottish Government in terms of the SHIP guidance, and the process that we have to go through is the one that we followed since 2008, and there's been changes around that. But essentially, it has to be a public document, and there are issues around business opportunities or potential perceived business opportunities for some landowners. Broadly speaking, the approach that we take is that any RSLs negotiating for land acquisition undertake their own independent valuation, either through the district valuer or through another independent, suitably qualified valuation team. And that's the basis of which the Scottish Government grant's drawn down. So in broad terms, the expectations of a site owner need to be pegged back to what the independent valuation says. That's the kind of assurance that we build in. But as you'll see from later on in the report, there are sometimes potential exceptions to that process.
Councillor Geddes.
Well, arising from that, sir, and I certainly wouldn't again say or quibble with the comments which either Councillor Smith or Mr Lynch have made. I think, in appropriate circumstances, this council, as Strategic Housing Authority, should be looking at the possibility of compulsory acquisition of sites which fulfil a strategic, or it can be shown, fulfil a strategic need and a strategic purpose and from a housing development perspective. And I would ask that we agree in principle today for a report to be brought forward to a future meeting of this committee, setting out our locus and our role as Strategic Housing Authority in doing so. I think it's a pretty tall ask, you know, for individual RSLs, as it were, to be encouraged or exhorted or instructed, insofar as we can instruct anyone, you know, to get down that particular route. But I think in appropriate circumstances, provided that, you know, we can identify a set of strategic criteria and future such sites, you know, meet that, I think that, you know, if need be, we as an authority, i.e. Strategic Housing Authority, should be prepared to consider developing or you know, instituting compulsory purchase order proceedings to ensure that that land or these sites in question are brought are under our control to be used or to be capable of being developed in the future for housing purposes by RSLs and whoever. As I say, and I would like to explore that, sir. I'm not suggesting for one moment, Chair, we do try to do that today. That's making policy in the hoof, and we don't have sufficient information. But if we could get a further report detailing the principles and the possibilities, I personally would find that, you know, helpful, because I think that is an area that we should be looking at exercising the maximum amount of influence that we can as Strategic Housing Authority. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr Lynch.
Thanks, Chair. Happy to take on board Councillor Geddis's proposal. If members are happy for us to go away and explore that, we can certainly bring back a paper setting out a potential policy under which we would look to invoke CPO powers that local authorities have where there is an overriding strategic need to do so. So if members wish us to do that, we'll certainly bring that back to a future meeting of the committee.
Councillor Crothers.
Thanks, yeah. Just it's reflecting back, because when Alice has brought that particular subject up, since I've been on this committee, I've used it twice. Once was in the West East Hame. Draw that in the link because it isn't related, but neighbourhood renewal, we used it, and we used it quite effectively. It was certainly used more as a threat, and it absolutely worked. You could even say it was a carrot, you could say. And it worked there, so I would have thought we already have those processes in place if we've used it already. The second thing on top of that is in fact that, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a report to kind of bottom it out and see how it applies, how the whole process works. No totally afraid to that, but in regards to, we just agree on a local development plan. We're not the only housing provider in Dumfries and Galloway, so we'd have to, again, there's been a new land allocation in regards to housing, so I mean that would have a bearing factor on it as well, I think. So as long as them two things could be taken into consideration as well, happy to see a report coming back.
I think, to my mind, if members are happy that it's an officer action rather than any recommendation to come back with a report, I would certainly see that it would be looking at areas of land that would be strategically important for housing supply. Now, obviously, that wouldn't be every area of land that would be in the LDP, but there are areas of land that come up from time to time that we as a council could view as being of strategic importance for the supply of housing, and I think it's that we need to concentrate on, and that's why, if members are content that we actually ask for the report to come back as an officer action rather than as any part of the recommendations. Members would seem to be happy with that. If we move on now to 3.4, the Friars Venal ground floor units. Members, any questions on that? Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. No, it's just to say that I'm glad that from our last meeting the recommendations were taken forward and have been agreed by DGHP with regards to the clawback agreement on the commercial units here, and that allows the development to go forward. So I'm happy with that.
If we move on to 3.5, St Cuthbert's, Kirkcudbright. Councillor, Councillor Peacock?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a bit of a problem with this in respect of the evaluations that have been put forward there, from our own valuation to it and the independent valuation. And therefore, as the report says, creating this funding gap. In my mind, the valuation of a piece of land is, as is taken by the valuer on the land itself. The extra costs associated, as listed by the independent valuer, they are associated build costs. They are not associated costs with the value of the actual land. And as a normal developer would go in, he would acquire a site, and then the associated costs within the build are taken into account when he's working out his costings there. So to have the difference in valuations like that, this 136,000 taken off the value of the land, I'm not comfortable with that, because basically what we're doing is we are taking money from council tax second homes to devalue our own land, which our own property valuers, and it states in the report, they cannot come to an agreement on the value of this piece of land because of that reason. So therefore we are using money from another fund to subsidise this, to sell to them, so that we can give the money back to ourselves. And I don't think that's right. I think we should be looking at another way of either getting an agreed valuation on the land as is without the associated works, because that is normal practice in a build or in a development. So I'm not really happy that we are actually looking to take money from the council tax second homes to devalue it, so that the developer can buy it at that devalue, just to give us the money back in the strategic, as is noted in here. So I'm interested to hear other members' comments.
You want to come in on that, Mr. Lynch? Mr. Westie, any comments you would like to make regarding the difference in evaluation?
Thank you, Chair. George West, I'm the Estates Management Service Leader with Property and Architectural Services. I would say that our valuation figure, it's in the report as 185. We've based that figure on comparables of other sales to RSLs by private landowners and by ourselves in the past few years. I would say we've gone back 3-4 years. I would agree with what Councillor Peacock said there. Our view is that our comparables, each site is slightly different, but the figures that are agreed, we would have to assume that any abnormal costs, as they're being called, have already been taken into account, and to then the second figure given, the LHA valuation, is 165. So we're very close there. But our view is that to then try and take off the next 100-odd thousand is double counting, which is why we are not in a position to say to you that we recommend this as a market value. We don't think it is. The market value is, in our opinion, in the 185, 186, 165 range.
Councillor Smith.
So why is your valuation 185 and not 165? It's a kind of contradiction. Earlier we talked about the fact that when we fund RSLs to develop property, then we use the independent valuation, and that was the answer given when it came to Eastfield Road. But your valuation is 185 and Lorburn's 165. So what's the £20,000 difference? How can your figures different from theirs? I appreciate they've got all the additional costs, so that's another matter. But your basic figure is still higher than their valuation. Why are we asking for £20,000 more than the
Chair, just to answer that, a valuation is an opinion of the market value. My opinion, or the council's opinion, is that it should be 185. The independent valuer, slightly different opinion, 165. If we were able to negotiate, we could say with them, we disagree on that small point, that one. We would probably, in the real world, it would probably come to an agreed value of 175. But what we can't agree is that the market, anyone in the market as a landowner would say, right, we agree 175, but you can then take off any other costs you want. We don't believe that the market would do that. The market would say, the figure is this, 185, 175, and that would be the price that would be paid.
Yeah, Councillor Smith.
So just to be absolutely clear, we are saying the 185 is entirely our evaluation. It's not influenced in any shape or form by any other decision, for example, the one at Policy and Resources about any gap in funding another project. It is absolutely our valuation of that project, that land.
Yes. There's myself and another chartered surveyor. We're registered valuers. We work for the council. We have experience of quite a lot of these sales over many years, and that is our opinion. We've analysed the sales, etc., and the market evidence, and that is our opinion. Say, another valuer can have a different opinion.
Councillor Crothers.
Just clarity on the district valuer. Just to get an understanding, take it that's no the council, that's somebody independent away from here. Just for me, my understanding, I think it's quite clear. We valued at 165, an independent valued at 185, independent values valued at 165. Because of the amount of works needing done to bring the site up to an acceptable standard, there's 156k of a funding gap, which was, so if it was a perfectly good site, you could probably add that 156 on to the value of 185, but it's devalued because of the site's been devalued because of the amount of problems that are actually on it already. So I suppose that's two questions. That second part I'll put forward as a question. Has it been devalued to the value of between 185 and 165,000 pounds because of the state of the site? And the second point is, has the district valuer been involved in this at any point?
Mr. West.
If I could take the district valuer part first. District valuer works for the Inland Revenue. It's a government department. He will do work for local authorities if he's asked. But say this council employs myself and another registered valuer. So the council's policy is set up by audit recommendations is that this valuation can be agreed between two independent valuers. Well, sorry, two valuers. That's ourselves and the other sides. So we haven't involved the district valuer at all. Sorry.
The second question, George, really is if this site was ready just to go, there wasn't anything untoward in regards to works needing carried out, and I think we've got an indicative figure about 156k or 136k, sorry, then this site would probably value at 136k more as what it actually is at the moment. It's just because of all the underlying works needing carried out.
We have proposed the 185 as the value that any other developer would pay for this. To be able to build on that site, you'd have to demolish the building. You'll see in the second line, the LHA valuation, it brackets includes demolition of the existing building. Our figure, we feel, also includes that, but we have slightly different opinions on what it would cost to clear the site. So we feel that if it was put on the open market as it stands, a developer would bid in the order of 185, 165.
You can want to come back in again.
I mean, I suppose just so I'm clear in my mind, I take on board everything what George is saying, but in simple terms for me, if I was buying a bike with round wheels, it'd be worth 50 quid. If it had square wheels, it'd be worth 30. And to fix it, 10 of each a wheel would fix it and bring it up to that value. That's the point I was trying to get to. So I think that's the same as what George is saying.
Councillor Geddes?
Well, I think the point I would like to make, sir, is that, you know, from a personal point of view, I think this is an extremely worthwhile project indeed. Will involve not only the Council of Strategic Housing Authority, but, you know, in another capacity in its guise as well. And I would hope, in fact, that, you know, we can reach a consensus today with a view, in fact, to assisting in the funding of this, to allow the project to go ahead. It's much needed. Now, I'm not entirely comfortable with certain, as you're well aware. I'm not entirely comfortable with certain aspects of the proposals, but, you know, I think, and I've got to be careful, you know, from an audit and risk perspective, you know, not to be creating or showing a bad example. I think we've, for obvious reasons, we've obviously got to approach this carefully to ensure, in fact, that anything we do decide can be clearly demonstrated to be in a reasonable way forward. And I think, you know, if we can approach it in that fashion, to me, it would be a big help. Because my worry would be, sir, that if we are not able to reach agreement, somehow or another, if we're not careful, this project will founder, and that would not be good, as it were, for the council, and more importantly for the client group that we have in mind in relation to the housing development. So really, what I'm saying is desperately keen to get a sensible and consensual way forward in overcoming this.
Councillor Peacock?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Councillor Geddes. I mean, I have no concerns about the project itself whatsoever. And it is a worthwhile project to take forward. And as a strategic housing committee, then we need to be looking at a way to proceed the project itself. But I cannot agree with the fact that we would be contravening our own council's policy if we devalue the land, because the policy states that we have to secure best value in sales of any property or land ownership that the council has. So we would be contravening that policy set by a different committee, and by using money from the council tax second homes just to subsidise it. I just do not think that is the right way to move forward, and I can see that there quite rightly be questions raised on that by members of the public in scrutiny and things like that when figures come out. So I agree that we have to find a way forward and move the project forward, but I'm not comfortable at all with the process that is being asked here. So Mr. Lynch could maybe advise us, or Mr. O'Neill, on how else we could do that. And it's obviously, I would think, by going back to Lorben and having discussions with them. But I really don't think we can, you know, governance-wise as well, I think we could be in trouble, and I'm not comfortable with it at all.
Mr. Lodge?
Thanks, Chair. I think probably the advice would be there are, as far as I can see, 3 potential options open to members. The first is to agree the proposal in the paper, which is to set aside funding of up to 156,000 to fill any gap between the independent valuation and the council's valuation. Can I just talk through the options? Between the independent valuation and the council's valuation, just to assure members that that is a legitimate use of the council tax second homes money, because what will you be using that for is to acquire the site for Lorburn to develop affordable housing. And once the receipt comes into the council, what the council then does with the receipt is a separate matter and is not subject to the requirements of the ring fencing related to that fund. And it's something that we've done elsewhere. So I can provide assurances, certainly from an officer perspective, that that is a legitimate course of action. Whether members wish to do that is a different matter. The other thing that we could do is that you could require us to go back to Lorburn and to see if we can negotiate a different outcome. The difficulty there is that the third party involved in that is the Scottish Government, whose guidance says they need to abide by the independent valuation, so that's the obstacle. But we can certainly have further discussions with that. And I think the third option, which maybe George West could further advise on, is that there is flexibility within the council's disposal policy for a separate committee to consider disposal at less than market value if there's a wider strategic need, but that's not for this committee. So maybe George could just clarify on that third point. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Best, and then let Councillor Peacock can come back in.
Chair, on the last part, then yes, it is possible to take it to Policy and Resources Committee to ask them to agree to sell for less than best consideration. The legislation would then require that to be justified so that members could show that they'd considered it and considered the benefits, and this benefits the Act says, yes.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, thank you for that, Mr. Lynch. But I think it's imperative that we point out that, as you say, the Scottish Government's policy is an independent valuation for housing associations. And the valuation of that piece of land is 165,000 by the independent valuer. The figure of 29,000 there is Lorben Housing Association's indicative offer. So I think we need to be very, very clear on that. The independent valuation is £165,000 for that piece of land. The figure quoted at 29 is Lorben's offer. That is not the valuation, not the independent valuation. So we need to be very clear on that before we take it forward. But I'm certainly comfortable with the third option of reverting it back to Policy and Resources, because it is their remit as to whether they would accept a lower offer than the valuation, and that takes it away from the Housing Subcommittee, and then it would be brought back at a later stage. But I think we need to be very clear on the valuation. The valuation from Lorben is not 29,000, it is 165. It's in the papers. That is their indicative offer, less associated costs.
The follow-on question from that is, what is the Scottish Government saying what the indicative value is? Did the Scottish Government take the 165,000, or did the Scottish Government say no, only 29,000 because you've got all those problems that you're going to have to solve? So, yeah, the valuation that they've put on it is 165. However, there's 136,000 a problem, which lays an indicative bid of 29,000. What one is the Scottish Government saying is the independent valuation? That's the problem I've got there. I've got a list of figures, and I can't for the life of me figure out what is the figure that the Scottish Government is going to go on, which would be the money that we would supply, or they would supply as part of the SHIP, as being the indicative value of that piece of land. Is it 165 or is it 29,000? Yeah, Mr. Lynch.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I did have some discussions with Scottish Government in preparation for the report to see if I could get any further clarification. Their position is that they would fund independent valuation minus whatever abnormal / additional development costs have been negotiated. I did push them to say, what would you define as abnormal or additional development costs for inclusion in that calculation? And they didn't offer an opinion. They said that was subject to negotiation between the two parties. So we did push them to try and get more clarity. Perfectly happy to go away and have that further conversation if members wish us to do that. But we took it, I think, as far as we could there. And that was the advice that we got. So we did try and explore and establish that, and they essentially pushed it back to the council and the acquiring party and said it's for you to negotiate.
So the answer is it could be anywhere between 29 and 165. Sorry for butting in, Councillor Carson. You're next.
Thanks, Chair. I think we've talked around this and most of the points have been covered. I'm just very concerned that we've got a report in front of us that suggests that we make a decision and be influenced by the fact that some of this money is going to go to Kakubra Charter. I don't think that's helpful at all. I'm very uncomfortable with the way this has been presented. At the end of the day, we've got two valuations that are not a million miles away from each other for how much the site's worth. But it looks like we are actually going to go in there and fund them more so they can pay closer to the market value. Then that can be passed on to the Kirkcudbright Charter. Now, that may be in the best interest of the council, but I don't think that's the right way to go about it. And I'm not happy with the reporter making a decision based on the information we've got today. I'm very much in support of the project. And when we saw the reports that we got previously about the ship and whatever, were in support of then, it's a bit like the Thornhill. We had a proposal in front of us for Thornhill Abbeyfield redevelopment. It was based on actually providing a full-time member of staff. We rejected that, and the whole scheme's now not viable as it was. We're maybe looking at the same sort of thing with this, where we need them to go back and look at the whole project again and bring the project back here. I'm very concerned that we're looking at 2 or 3 different issues within this one project.
Councillor Crothers?
Thanks, Chairman. I was okay with option 1 until you brought up that point in regards to the valuation of whether it is 29 or 165. We have done this before in the past. I think next door was a prime example where we did it previously, and that was a much higher figure than this. So that's where I was comfortable with this, that we'd seen it before, been through this discussion, but the very point you raised, what I hadn't picked up on, makes it sit more uncomfortable in regards to what is the Scottish Government's valuation on it, what's their interpretation. I would like to have seen that, I'd like that clarified, so I don't know what the process to go forward, whether we defer this, bring it back, get clarity on that, or it does go to policy and resources, what the best route for that is, but open to listen to different proposals.
You want to make any comment on that, Mr. Lynch?
I'd probably just refer back to the advice I gave to members earlier. I think there's, as far as I can see, there's 3 options that the members can decide upon. Either agree the proposal in the paper, defer the report and ask for us to negotiate further with Lawburn in conjunction with Property Services to see if we can come to some accommodation on both sides, or agree to pass it on to Policy and Resources Committee with a recommendation that they consider disposing of the site for less than best consideration because of the strategic housing need to secure the site. I think they're the 3 options for members to consider today.
Councillor Lever?
I think one of the problems, if it goes back to Policy and Resources, and we do agree to accept the 29,000, we then uncouple the 2 parts of the project, because then that would then need to come back to this committee for us to allocate the 156,000 from the second homes fund, and I don't know then how you marry the 2 together, having done that personally.
Thanks, Joe. Just to clarify, if it went to Policy and Resources Committee, I think that potentially the proposal would be to accept a smaller purchase price, a smaller capital receipt, and therefore negate the need to top up that money from council tax second homes. That would be a standalone decision. If members were minded to ask P&R Committee to look at it in that way.
I'll bring Councillor Smith in first because Councillor Crothers has said a couple of goes, then it's yourself, Councillor Crothers.
I mean, the only thing about passing it to Policy and Resources is that Policy and Resources did take a strategic decision around the Kirkcudbright Charter, which I appreciate what Finlay's saying, but you're asking a committee effectively to take a decision that effectively contradicts the previous decision. They took a decision that they would support the Kirkcudbright Charter and the estimated income from the sale of the land would be around £200,000. We're then going back to say, aye, but now we want you to accept £29,000, you know. So it does cut across a previous strategic decision at Policy and Resources. Now, it's not for us to preempt what Policy and Resources will decide, but it does contradict what they have previously decided. We're asking them to basically forget about their last decision.
Councillor Crothers?
After hearing what's been said, I do feel it's safer to actually probably go with option 1, but agree in principle, but for it, let negotiations take place and then it comes back for final ratification so we know exactly what we're actually agreeing to, Chairman, if that's an option. We do agree in principle, but the final ratification is to come back. So negotiations can take place, we can get clarity of Scottish Government, we come back, we know exactly what the cautions we're agreeing to.
Councillor Peacock, you look as if you're wanting to come in there.
Yes, Chair. I'm just thinking I'm maybe agreeing with Councillor Carruthers. I'm just trying to weigh it up. But yeah, if we go back and look at renegotiation, I could be comfortable with that, and then another report come back to this committee with the determination of that. And again, if Mr Lynch was to go back to Scottish Government and push for an opinion from them, it would give us better clarity on the actual valuation as how it would turn out if Scottish Government got involved. So it may be that they come back with a figure in between that, which, you know, I would be happy enough to accept, because then it takes the onus away from this committee by devaluing the land. The Scottish Government have stepped in and said, well, this is our valuation on that. And I think that covers this committee for any sort of comebacks then, because, you know, we've gone through the channels, we've been approached, government have advised us, and we could move forward with it then.
Councillor Geddes?
Going back to Councillor Smith's comment, the Policy and Resources Committee took the decision that they did, Chair, on the basis of the best information that was available to them at that time. And that was a perfectly sustainable and legitimate decision in my view. Now, what's happened, of course, is that we've been told that there are additional costs based on site, the site investigation which took place. And I would feel that it would be perfectly tenable if this subcommittee today agreed to refer the matter back to Policy and Resources and say, look, you know, here's further information which is intruded into your previous decision. Do you want to review it on that basis, or what's your take going to be on that basis? I don't see anything from a procedural perspective which is fundamentally wrong or repugnant in that.
Thanks for that one. The problem I see that we have here is the fact that the proceeds of this sale of land will be going to another strategic project that another committee has decided to fully back. My questions revolve around, if that was not the case, would we be having all these discussions? I'm perfectly happy, and I'm perfectly happy, that we actually put it back to Policy and Resources to ask them to reconsider their decision. However, at the same time, I don't think we should ignore the possibility of the negotiation ongoing between the RSL and the council, and the clarification being sought by the Scottish Government as to exactly, well, what exact valuation is it that you would be prepared to actually accept? Is it the one with what the value of the land is, or is it the one with the value of the land minus all the problems they're going to have to solve to get it to a state where it is buildable on? If members are content with the fact that we refer it back to Policy and Resources to see if they will accept less than what the market value, but continue on with, in the background, the negotiation and clarification that I've just outlined. Councillor Gett.
Well, on the back of what you've just said, sir, on the basis of your qualifications, if I can use the term, you know, you could perhaps, you know full well what I mean by qualifications, Chair. You could perhaps take the attitude that, before referring, it would be worthwhile getting the responses to the points that you've raised before referring the matter back to Policy and Resources. That would be helpful, I've no doubt, to Policy and Resources in coming to a decision. You would be giving them the maximum possible information that you feel is relevant in relation to your approach.
Councillor Smith.
Because I think, to be fair, you're not even really asking Policy and Resources to reconsider the decision. The decision was the income that we received from the sale would go towards the Kirkcudbright Charter. Now, if that income becomes £29,000, there's no need to, the Policy and Resources would have to decide to effectively dispose of an asset below value, but they wouldn't need to reconsider that decision. The only decision would be that you would not be giving a great deal of money to the Kirkcudbright Charter. So they would not be reconsidering that decision. I think we have to be clear about that. You would be effectively reducing the amount of money going towards that project. It wouldn't be the estimated £200,000. It would be £29,000 instead, and that's a decision they'll have to live with, basically. But I think it would be clear you're not asking them to reconsider that. You're not, unless you're proposing that you then tell them to go off and find another £100,000 from something else.
Just again, on the back of what Colin's saying, I think you shouldn't forget or lose the fact that this is updated information that would be going back to policy and resources. It would be relevant information which would cast a different light over the original decision that policy and resources made in this instance.
Councillor Carson?
I think Colin set it on the head. That's there's the decision that policy and resources is not to change, that the money's ring fenced. What I'm concerned about is if you look at this, you have an overview of this, it would appear that we are using council tax second home fund to ensure that Kirkcudbright Charter get the money, and from there, that's all that. This is the problem, and what we've got to decide is whether we think that's acceptable and whether everybody else thinks it's acceptable. And if it is, that's fine. But if not, Kirkcudbright will have to deal with the £29,000 that they're getting. That's why it makes this so difficult. We're actually looking at 3 or 4 different things within this one project.
Yeah, and just for the benefit, it's not just the sale of this land that the decision that Policy and Resources was making. There was another building that was to be sold that was going to be ring fence for the Kirkcudbright, so it's not just this one that the money was ring fence for. Mr. O'Neill wants to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just to make the point that certainly in our past experience and looking at what's happened elsewhere, I would suggest it's highly unlikely that the Scottish Government will want to involve itself in a local authority land evaluation process. I don't think that the Scottish Government, it's their role to give a view in the value of land in Kirkcudbright, and I think that's the view that they would adopt. So negotiations would be between Lord Burn Housing Association and the Council. I don't think the Scottish Government would place itself in the middle of those negotiations.
Councillor Crothers?
Just so I'm absolutely clear, because I asked the question earlier, because of things that have been said at the moment, what's its value and what's the difference? I got told that the Dumfries and Galloway Council have valued it at 185, and that's through Georgia and his colleague. There's been an independent for Lower Burn, independent value come in, they've valued at 165. That's in the top 3.5, that's the top 2 columns. The 4th column down, we have Local Housing Authority indicative offer to the council of 29k. Now, why they got offer 29k? Now, when it's worth either 185 or 165 or 175, why are they offering 29? Because of the abnormal cost is what we're hearing. But it's so if the decision is that we're going to sell it for less than best value, it must go back to policy and resources, I would say. But in the past we have, as I said earlier, actually put funding in a very similar process to this, to other developments where it's fitted. To me, it's not about funding money going to the Kirkcudbright Charter or no, it's just whether we're willing to, this is about providing affordable homes and affordable housing in the Dumfries and Galloway. I may be wrong there.
Mr. O'Neill?
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the value that's contained within the report, that will be based on Lord Burns Housing Association's financial projections over a 25-year period set against rental income and whether the scheme's financially viable or not to them. So there is a risk that they could adopt the view that the price they're being required to pay exposes them to too much risk, and that's just a possibility that's there.
You can come back in.
Aye, thanks very much. If that's the case, then to me this is something we should be agreeing today as per option 1, because this is about supplying houses on the ground. It's not about putting money into Kirkcudbright Charter. Doesn't matter what comes of this, whether the council decide to let it go for best value or whether we pump prime it through the second council tax homes income, second homes council tax income, I should say. This that's what we're looking at in real terms. We've done this before. I don't see why we shouldn't just support this today. I don't see why it should go back to policy and resources. The Scottish Government's not got to change their mind whatsoever, and that's the main point on what you raised, why I then reflected on it. I think this is, we're actually, in real terms or no, actually, we're helping pump prime, which we have done in many occasions when it comes to social housing. We've done it in a different manner when it comes to the private sector. We have done it through the National Housing Trust, but in this we've done it so many times in the past, I don't think or veering off in any direction that we haven't actually followed through on before.
Yeah, I hear what Mr. O'Neill said, but at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, the money that is eventually paid out of the ship is decided by Scottish Government. They actually decide the allocation that they would give to any particular project, am I correct?
Thanks, Chair. The way that the process works is that the ship identifies projects and indicative allocations to support those projects. The detail of the specific grant drawdown is governed by Scottish Government rules. So the actual money that Lawburn would receive in terms of site acquisition, build costs, and other associated costs relative to any particular project ultimately sits with the Scottish Government to assess, audit, and make sure that everything is compliant with their regulations. Yeah.
Thank you. I've now got two offers on the table. We have one that we actually... well, I think I've narrowed it down to actually two ways forward for this particular part of the paper. We have one way forward, which is to carry on the negotiation and and try and seek clarification for the Scottish Government, having taken what Mr. O'Neill says, and once that's been clarified about what would be the actual offer, for that to be referred back to Policy and Resources, or we have another offer on the table that we actually just go ahead and agree what's in the paper today. Councillor Collins.
Can I ask for a 10-minute adjournment, Chair?
I'm certainly quite willing for an adjournment. I would suggest possible longer than 10 minutes. I'll take 15. Thanks for coming back, members. We're ready to go again. Anything further from the talks during the break? And that, Councillor Smith?
Maybe more than one, who knows? But I mean, I think in terms of just thinking it through, that the issue is really whatever the two options on the table are, you're coming to the same conclusion. If you pass it to Policy and Resources to ask them to effectively take a smaller amount for the land, it is because we're accepting that there are additional costs for this project. And because that's why we're taking less of the value. We're accepting 29,000, for example, instead of 185, because we accept there are additional costs. Now, if we accept there are additional costs, there is no reason at all why we shouldn't fund that today, effectively. And you're effectively funding the additional costs, and you're acknowledging these additional costs exist. Because if you're doing it by passing it to Policy and Resources, then there is no reason not to do it today, which is why I think effectively agreeing the recommendation would seem the sensible way forward, because either way, you're accepting what you're funding is the additional costs in this project. Now, presumably, those additional costs will have to be justified in terms of the project going forward. We'll need to be clear that those additional costs actually exist, which is mentioned in the report, and that's what we're funding, effectively. That's certainly just my thought on the process.
Councillor Carson?
Yeah, I agree totally. I think what has not been helpful that we've got an indicative cost of 29,000 in here, because the land is worth what it is worth, and ultimately we're looking at two pots of money or two different organisations, and we should be looking at the valuation being £175,000, and the council second home fund is there for the extra costs, nothing to do with purchasing the land. So I think we wouldn't be. I'm going to criticise the report. If it had been written out in a different way, I don't think we would have been spending 3/4 an hour debating it. I think it's quite simple. If the land has been valued at somewhere around £175,000, but the additional costs are going to be 136, I have no issue at all in funding the additional 136 from the second homes fund.
Councillor Carruthers, then Councillor Peacock, and then Councillor Lever.
Thanks, aye. Just for Sherman, I think it's been summed up really well there by both. But it's 156, I think, we're agreeing in principle, and that's to make the gap up, but that's to fund any extra works, or depending on what the final agreement is and the actual acquisition cost. But no, I'm happy to do that in regards, but that's what we're funding. But the council, I would imagine, will sell it for pretty much the value is indicated at 29k.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you. No, Chair, I disagree with that. What we should be looking to do here is the valuation as possibly negotiate between the two valuations there, our own valuer and independent valuer. If they go back for negotiation, say it's 175,000, that is what we ask Lawburn to pay for the land acquisition, because that is the valuation of the land. We as a Strategic Housing Committee can, after that, agree to the funding gap of 156 for the build cost of the properties, and therefore it takes it away from land acquisition costs, and that keeps us right with the second tax, council tax second homes fund. We are allowed to do that as this committee. We can use that money for the build costs of the properties, but take it completely away from the land acquisition costs, and I would be happy with that.
Councillor Lever.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, at 3.4, the Fry's Venel ground floor units, we've agreed to fund additional costs there for up to the level of 150,000. I don't see any problem with that. The council tax second homes fund being used to do that. I do have concerns if you drop the value of the land to the 29,000, but in terms of additional works, I don't see any problem with that.
Councillor Carruthers?
No, just so I'm absolutely clear, and maybe it was my misunderstanding. If we're saying that a true valuation is somewhere between 165 and 185, and that's the way we fund it, and fair enough, I just thought the way we're talking, because of, no, that's right, absolutely right, I misunderstood that, and it was explained earlier. Lowburn Housing Authority have actually valued it at 29k to make their business case stack up. Fair enough, no, that's absolutely right. So if they're paying the true cost, we'll pay any extra associated costs to bring the site up to the standard that's required.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate position that we've been in is, had the information been put in front of us regarding Lowburn had valued it at 29,000. However, to make it viable, we would have to put in the extra money, which we have done for other projects, as was mentioned before, the Friars Venel. If there had been no other mention of any other project or any other committee, we wouldn't have been sitting here for the last 45 minutes discussing this. Just to turn to recommendations, we're being asked to agree the amendments to the Strategic Housing Investment Plan as detailed in paragraphs 3.2 to 3.5, with an additional council funding contribution of 150,000 to support the Friars Venel and up to 156,000 to support the St Cuthbert's project to be made from council tax second homes income. Councillor Carson.
I think we've got to be careful, because it's proposed to allocate additional council tax second home income up to a maximum of 156 to ensure disposal of the site meets strategic objectives. I don't think that's right. What we're doing is funding the additional costs involved in the project. It's nothing to do with keeping the value of the land up to ensure the objectives of SHIP and Kakubri Charter. That needs to be taken out there altogether. What we're doing is funding the additional costs involved in developing on that site.
Yeah, the recommendation says up to 156,000 to support the St Cuthbert project to be made from the council tax second homes income. 2.2 is agree to the proposals that a clawback clause in perpetuity be included in the offer of the grant to DGHP, which will require 30% of any future capital receipts for the sale of the commercial units to be paid to the council as detailed in the appropriate paragraph, and to note the income and uncommitted current balances in the council tax second homes fund as detailed in the appropriate paragraphs. I thank members for their attendance and therefore